There's an old oak somewhere in these patches. I think it's grown up now, where they would hang them from. It was an actual tree to lynch people. It's called the old oak. But I've asked people, like, where is the oak? They say, we don't know where it is now, but we know it was back there. There may be a person here who knows where it is. It's just kind of hard to get people to tell you the exact location. And he was hung and he was shot. And they mutilated his body and did some horrible things. He was later taken down, and he was buried by one of the brothers. One of Joshua Ashley's brothers actually buried him on their farm. So he was buried close by. We don't know the location of that either, but we do know generally. He was never charged. Joshua Ashley was clearly the one who led it. Everyone agreed, but he was friends with the governor at the time.
On October 11, 1911, Willis Jackson, a black laborer in Anderson, South Carolina, was lynched by a mob of 5,000 after being accused by an 11-year-old white girl of sexual assault. There was no trial, no evidence, only mob violence fueled by racial hatred. Leading that mob was State Senator Joshua Ashley. A prominent political figure, Ashley didn't just witness the lynching, he helped orchestrate it. His role revealed how deeply racism and political power were intertwined in the Jim Crow South. While Jackson's life was stolen without justice, Ashley faced no consequences. He maintained his image as a man of the people, while the truth of his actions was quietly buried.
The story goes that a young girl, a young white girl, was leading a cow in the field, and she was ambushed by an African-American teenage boy, and he jumped on her and attempted to assault her. He is known as a guy who would take in people for good. That's the legend. He was a very generous man. If you went over there and he would give you help. So they brought her there, left her there, and her name was Daisy. We don't know who her parents were. The story goes, her father was killed in a card game in Georgia. We have no idea who her mother was. Nothing's written down. This is all passed down through the family. And so she was brought here to Honeypath as a child. There's varying ages on the story, whether she was a baby. I heard a baby in a basket. I've heard a 12-year-old. I've heard both. I don't know how old she was. She was dropped on Joshua Ashley's doorstep.
Joshua Phillips is the great-grandson of Joshua Ashley. His great-grandmother, who had been taken in by Ashley, was later sexually abused by him. That abuse led to the birth of Phillips' grandmother, Ashley's final child before his death.
Joshua Ashley owned the farm outside of town. He was the state senator at the time. He was a very powerful man in the community here, a bigwig in state politics. So they felt, I guess, because he was a big landowner and a powerful man, that they could leave her there and he would raise her. He was married, had several children, and they did. They took her in, and he raised her, but unfortunately, when she got to be a teenager, he started raping her and abusing her, and he fathered 4 children with her. My grandmother is the youngest. She was born, I believe, either the year before he died or the year he died. He literally had a massive stroke the year he fathered her, or within that time frame. And he died in 1916. She was born in, I believe, 1915. So he didn't live long after her birth, but he was very abusive. My grandmother told me as a child that he would tie her mom to a tree. Some of the stuff was very horrific. She tried to get away from him. She ran away. He would go chase her and find her, bring her back. And so I knew Joshua Ashley was my great-grandfather. That's all I knew until recent years. My grandmother would say some things, and when she was dying. My mother was born when my grandmother was in her 40s. So my mother never knew him. My grandmother never knew him. So none of us had any contact with him at all. We just knew who he was. We saw his picture. We knew him as a famous guy around here. But I didn't know the extent of his brutality and his backstory. Now, he publicly was a great guy. Did a lot of legislative things that were very positive for the state, labor, our agriculture. He was big into agriculture, helping the farmers and all that kind of thing. So from a public perspective in those areas, he was very, very respected. As you all know, he had a dark side. So, and not even in his personal life. And so my grandmother did not take his last name. None of the children did. They took a name of my great-grandmother's boyfriend, who she moved in with after his death.
Family history doesn't define who a person is, a belief that led Joshua Phillips and his family to start over, choosing to leave behind the name Joshua Ashley and never speak of him again. For generations, silence was their way of coping with the pain. Now, Phillips is choosing a different path. By sharing his side of the story, he hopes to confront the past and inspire change.
One of Joshua Ashley's brothers actually buried him on their farm. So he was buried close by. We don't know the location of that either, but we do know generally. He was never charged. Joshua Ashley was clearly the one who led it. Everyone agreed, but he was friends with the governor at the time. And so he and the governor were friends, and no charges were ever filed, nothing was ever done. Newspapers wrote about it, but nothing was ever done. And when the governor at the time was asked in a debate when he was running for re-election, what are you going to do about the lynching in Honeypath? And he said, why would I care about a lynching in Honeypath?
Historian Dr. Otis W. Pickett studies the role of religion in the American South, how it was used to control, to justify, and to erase. His insight helps us understand how a lynching like Willis Jackson's wasn't just tolerated, it was defended.
And so you see the same sort of extra-legal violence happening to African-American communities in order to be a spectacle to the larger community of what could happen if you challenged the status quo, if you challenged who was in control. And so this lynching in 1911 is one that happens from essentially the 1870s up to 1930, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 3,500 lynchings across the U.S. South. So in order to understand that, you've got to understand almost a century of history before. So you have to understand that America, in a lot of ways, is a frontier society, often with violence and vigilante justice. And this goes back in South Carolina to the regulator movement, which was prior to the American Revolution. And because there was no systemic law enforcement, oftentimes groups of militia that were not registered or legalized by the government would exact violence and justice as they saw it against neighbors who they disagreed with ideologically. You likely have very little political autonomy or voice. Your activities are strictly regulated. And if you in any way violated the chain of order through threats, but it could also even be less than a threat. It could be a perceived slight. It could be that you didn't tip your hat the proper way, or you looked someone in the eye improperly. Any way that an individual wanted to exact violent justice upon you, they could do that.
The society that lets that happen. Why is it that you can live in a society where someone does something that horrible and no one says, gee, we ought to punish that person for having done it? And so it was not just individuals, but it was a group, and it was a social structure that permitted that to go unpunished.
And so in order to control African American populations, oftentimes individuals were chosen by a community to have an extra legal public murder to display to the larger community. This is what's going to happen to you if you break the structure, the power structure in place, if you challenge the power structure in place, if you become violent in any way, shape, or form. This is the kind of justice.
So they're trying to compensate, and they want to erase all the bad guys. Anybody who was racist in our history, let's get rid of them. Let's wipe them away from our history. Let's not teach anything about them. Well, I have a different perspective. I believe we need to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. History is good, bad, and ugly. It is a broken humanity doing broken things, doing some good things and doing some broken things. Every historical figure, with exception to some, they're complex figures. They have things they did well, things they didn't do well. Josh Ashley did some great things for this county economically, socioeconomically. I mean, if you read about his background, he actually wanted to improve African American living in the town. All right? So there were some things he did supposedly well, but he had a dark side, he had an evil side. Every figure has good, bad, and ugly. And if we erase all the bad guys, we don't learn from the bad guys. What do we learn from the bad guys? What not to do, And you got to know who Josh Ashley is so you don't become him.
And so when people are finally free to talk about it, it relieves this tremendous yoke off of your shoulders, this burden that you've been carrying for decades. And this is a common experience among white Southerners from South Carolina all the way out to Texas. And so I would imagine there are individuals in Honeypath who know about this history and have not been able to talk about it. But being able to talk about it is going to be cathartic, and it's going to be the first step toward reconciling with the victims' families. But you speaking it and knowing that it happened heals. It heals both sides. And then in what can be sometimes very divided society along racial lines or political lines, you can actually come together over this atrocity, historical atrocity. You can come together and forge a stronger community that can be sustained in difficult times where there is division.
But it is still a factor today. It's not something that we've overcome entirely. And so that's why we're working to remember and reconcile. And you can't step over remembering. You can't go from where we are to reconciling without passing through remembering.
Restoring harmony is essential if we hope to move forward as a society. True reconciliation begins with the courage to confront the truths we've long kept buried. The story of Willis Jackson is just one of many that deserves to be heard.
I think in history I've learned a lot from the villain. You've got to know who Adolf Hitler is so you don't repeat what he did. You've got to learn who Nazi Germany was in order to not become Nazi Germany. And you've got to learn who the KKK is in order not to go back to that way of thinking. Fascism people need to be aware of it. These things, we need to be aware of them in history, and we need to teach the good and the bad and the ugly. And by no means are we saying that they're great people. We're just saying they lived, they existed, they are who they are, they were horrible, they did this, it was evil. Now let's move on, let's learn from it. Let's not make the same mistake twice.